do that EMP thing. You turn that on. And there we are, right?
Gotcha.
Hey, everybody. I think we're already live. So, hi, this is John Wolpert. We're here on the Baseline Show, as always, every Wednesday at noon. And I'd like to thank Yoav Bitan as our new guy for setting these the show up. And yeah, sorry for the a little bit late. We had a couple of technical glitches there, but it's good to see you all. Yoav Bitan, we got Sonal Patel, Mark Rimza, Keith Salzman, Charles Todd, Mark Haddle, Samrat Kishore, the illustrious, Diogo Vazquez, Andreas Freund, and Jack Wiring. And it's good to see everybody today. It's a very good day for baselining. We're going to get into a lot of stuff. Sonal, I think you've got some updates and announcements to do, and we can get the show on the road.
Awesome. Thank you. So we'll have a pretty informal agenda today, similar to some of our old shows, but those always were a big hit, just to have some conversations as an open office hours here. But we'll start out with seeing some code. We'll get some updates from the community, depending on who joins us and who wants to share. And then we'll also discuss our Dev Connect Amster-based event that is coming up in about 3 weeks. And we have some exciting updates there and a lot of traction for that event. And part of that, we'll be going through some of the blips that were submitted by the community and fleshing out the viability of that work and finalizing our list for the core devs and new core devs to start working on. But just to start us off, I'm going to hand over to Keith Salzman, one of our core devs here, who's going to walk us through some of the Blip 6 monolithic test suite work that was previously done. And this test-driven development work is going to lead into the simple reference implementation. That is one of the highest priorities for our 2022 roadmap that was published. So he's going to kind of walk us through how that work lays the groundwork for the upcoming 2022 efforts. Over to you, Keith.
Thank you very much, Sonal. Let me know if you guys can see my screen.
We can.
I can see it.
All right, thank you. Pretty. Thanks. So I think one of the main things we've noticed kind of over time, especially since I've joined the mesh, is that whenever we have new people come in, we just had somebody the other day in chat, say, how do I get started baselining? I've kind of looked at the docs, maybe I've taken a peek at the standards. I'm a little lost at where do I go from here? How do I really wrap my mind around baseline? And in fact, really, this was my own personal experience. When you first get introduced to baseline, it's the amount of knowledge you need to kind of get over that hump to create that mental image in your mind of, what is it in its entirety? What does it do? It's a lot. You need a lot of knowledge, right?
This is code. You're showing code. You can't show code without.
You know what that
I turn it on again. Code don't lie. Thank you. We had to do code don't lie. So Keith, oh man, that's on you. You should never show code without doing code don't lie.
Oh yeah, that's my bad. I take full responsibility. Actually, I think it's Yoav. I blame Yoav for that one.
Yeah,
you're the new tech guy. Where's the code don't lie? Eh?
We'll improve next time.
All right, go on. Sorry about that.
All right, so yeah, today we're going over kind of what the Blip 6 team did. They laid the groundwork. This is the BPI Monolith test suite. And so what this does, it kind of really lays the groundwork for a test-driven development of what we're calling the SRI, or the simple reference implementation. And I was leading into that earlier, we're saying, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around what baseline is when you first get introduced to it. If you're an advanced baseliner, right, with the baseline protocol, and everything that's going on, and you're trying to do your own implementation, maybe this file folder isn't for you. Maybe you want to look at Battleship, BRI1, BRI2, there's plenty of examples out there, right? But if you're new to baseline and you want to kind of wrap your mind around things, first things first, go through, read the standard. I know it's a little difficult to get through it all in one go, but try to read through, look at some good diagrams there, go through the docs, read the docs. And then on top of that, we're trying to create this simple reference implementation, a place where you can go to and run and see, okay, I can simply see at least like one baseline interaction between two counterparties. Now, it may not be what you'll see in the real world, right? And this is true for a lot of more complicated tools we see with either ZKPs or something else. When you go in, the first one you see, although it has the same core principles as a more complicated real life example, that it's not one that you could really apply between multiple business parties, right? It's a scaled down version to help you wrap your mind around, and that's what the monolith, the test suite monolith, aims to do, right? So just a little background about that as you're looking at the code here. You already noticed within the BPI monolith test suite, we have the BPI. We already have some kind of notorious components you've seen in baseline: identity, messaging, storage, the work group, and so on and so forth. If you go to the bottom here, if you're getting new to baseline, you've read through the standard, you've read through the docs, you go to the bottom here and click on tests, you'll be brought to this file, right? So in test-driven development, this is kind of where we started, right? We looked at it and we said, okay, at the very simplest level, what are the steps in kind of creating that BPI instance, and then the steps in this case, a simple order between two counterparties, which again, we want to emphasize it in the, synchronizing multi-party interaction. Really, baseline is going to be more complicated, 3 or more parties, but this is more of our educational tool, get people ramped up. So we see here, okay, let's say we're making a BPI. We've created a BPI instance, a baseline protocol instance, and we want to ask ourselves, well, what do we expect to be true about that instance? And this is what the Blip team did. They said, well, what do we expect to be true about that instance? What's some minimal set of data that we know will be true? In this case, the ID, the name, product IDs within that BPI, because we're talking about ordering an item between two entities. What is that product ID equal to? What should orders be there? What proof should be there right at the very beginning, right? Now, what this really helps us in doing is that, let's imagine as we move into the future and we actually start implementing, in different epochs, these different portions of the BPI of our baseline simple reference implementation identity messaging. Well, then when we run those components and we run the actual baselining of the order between the two parties, we'll already have all that we expect in a particular situation. So if it's just setting up the BPI, we'll already have, okay, this is what I expect to be true of it, right? And this test suite, the test harness itself, will be another building block that you can kind of pull out, dynamicize, and even apply to other implementations to say, can I link this in to my new implementation, run the test, and see when the BPI is created, are all these things true? And this is just the very simple beginning. As we roll through, we see, okay, well, given that we've instantiated BPI and we add a work group. So we add a work group, so what we expect to be true about the work group, right? And we have all these expectations. And then it goes on and on and on. And we can look through at a couple of them, but so that's just kind of like the very basics of the test-driven development and how this is going to drive other implementations, specifically the simple reference one to get people off the ground here. So let's take a look at a more complicated one. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anybody in the group? I saw some unmutings. No? Okay, all right, I'll keep going.
I love this. I wish every baseline show had a segment with one of y'all going through stuff like this. And so Keith, thanks for doing this. Keep going.
Yeah, no problem. Of course. So as you can see here, in the development of this, this is in reality far from real implementation. And why is that? Well, we have all of those packages over here within a single folder. Are these things exactly doing what you'd expect a baseline implementation to do? Well, when you first create them, we will just be creating like mocks, right? So for example, if we actually look into the what is a BPI instance here? What is it doing? What does it contain? What has these components, but these components themselves are stored within their own folders here. And when you get to a point where, let's say one of them has to provide something that would be done if we decide to implement with ZKPs or with a CCSM, like providing like a proof that would be on chain, that proof right now in its implementation is just made through, TypeScript mocking deep strict equalities and like a Merkle.js. So the idea behind that is that we go from the bottom up from the test, right? That when we're looking at the test itself, we say, okay, what do I need the BPI to do right now just to fulfill these expectations? I don't need to go straight to a full BPI yet. I just needed to be able to fulfill these expectations here. And that kind of leads you in your development. It's being driven by the test itself. It's saying, okay, I needed to be able to have this ID, to have a name, to have these product links, IDs. So we make that part, or the part was made within Blip 16. And then we go to the next test, which is the addition of, all right, well, now the BPI needs to be able to handle a work group. It needs to be able to add a work group and add in some parameters for that work group, like a name, an ID, the work steps that work group is going to contain. So let's go ahead and let's actually just make that as it is, right? Let's create a workgroup component that is able to handle these things, a name, an ID, some getter and setter functions for, possible mock functionality, and then work steps themselves. Once that's done, and as long as it fulfills the expectations of the test, and we move on to the next part. Okay, what's the next step? We get a BPI instance, we get a workgroup component. You can add workgroups themselves. Well, now that we have a workgroup component, we need to put something in that workgroup, right? We need a work step, right? So we go in and add in that work for the work step. Or I keep saying we again, Blip 16 I was a part of, but there's many portions of this code that wasn't developed by me. So let me give the shout outs to all the, Ogden, Balint, Dawi, and they were part of Blip 6 originally. So anyways, we go on, okay, we need to make a, given a newly created work group. So we're assuming we've created a work group. We have Alice creates a work step, and the work step is going to be added into that work group, and it's visible in the work step for a given work group. So that's the next part of the test. And we say, okay, we first write out what are the expectations of this, right? Well, we want the work group, the work steps length, we expect it to be equal to 1. We're only adding a single work step, the next simplest implementation. And then, what else do we need to be equal to? Well, if we grab out the exchange orders work step, a collection, the first one in the index 0, will actually be equal to the work step that was actually returned when we created it, right? When we instantiated that work step. So again, just grabbing, what are those expectations when you're adding a work step into a work group, writing those expectations out, and then going and based off of those saying, hey, let's write the code. What is a work step? Right? What does a work step need to be able to do, but just for this base functionality? Stuff may be added to the work step later for sure, right? So in this case, we need to be able to instantiate it. We need to be able to set some business logic that work step is going to execute. So you need to be able to say, okay, well, this work step has this particular logic. It's going to execute in this fashion between the two counterparties. In this case, it's to add an order. We need to be able to add that actually into the work step, and then add that work step into the the work group itself to be executed later on, right? So we're not actually even executing the work step, right? We're taking the next step at a time. So the next part of the test, okay, given that we've prepared the work group, the work step, well, before we could even execute the work step, we need another party, right? So we're gonna say Alice invites Bob, and we go on, and we go on in that same manner, right? Letting the test and the expectations of the test that are based on the standard, which let me tell you, is not an easy read. Thank you, Andreas. But really good stuff.
You're
and this
welcome.
is where it comes in. Yeah, this is where it comes where I'm saying, or you need to read the standard, but then when you come back to doing the implementation,
When
or
you come back to life
after
reading the standard.
if you come back to life, no. when you come back from the standard, you're like, okay, well, I read the standard, that's great, and all those things I understood, but it's hard to put it into kind of a, this circumstantial implementation that I'm trying to imagine in my mind. So you want to have the standard side by side, and that's what we did as we were developing this. Well, let's say when you add a work step, what are the things, based on the standard that we need, right? There are some kind of caveats here, right? That in being the kind of simple, or what will be developed into the simplest reference implementation, is that there is part of the standard that talks about, and we've discussed this before, Andreas has made us very aware of this, about the BPI interoperability, right? So once we change this in the next few months into that simple reference implementation that people can go in and run and see the transaction between the two parties, the next step would be to create that simplest reference implementation that actually has the BPI interoperability, kind of an extension of this, right? So it is mainly an educational tool for those who are trying to get in the baseline, the thing that we feel like is missing the most. If you're an advanced baseliner, the baseline protocol, again, there's plenty of tools, great tools available to you that I'm sure that John, Andres, everybody can talk about at length to actually baseline. And part of it are in the baseline review here as well. If you're new to baseline, you're trying to wrap your mind around it, read through the standard, go through the docs, look at the Monolith test suite and try to follow and say, okay, what were they doing here? Where did they find this from the standard? Why is it that they've done it this way? And it's not perfect, for sure. It's actively and currently being worked on and implementing the zero knowledge circuits right now, and a CCSM as well. So if you have questions, then come to us too. Hey, why was it done this way, right? We had a guy in chat the other day just feeling lost. Like, how do I even get started? This is how you get started. The standard, the docs, and this together, reading through, asking yourself, why is it done this way? Coming to us in chat, why is it done this way? Anyways, that's
also just to add here, right? It's sort of like the standard is not an implementation guide, right? That's one thing. It's like if you read the standard and you're looking for a guide how to implement it, that is not what a standard is, with a capital NOT, right? You have freedom. You just need to make sure that your implementation meets the requirements of the standard. So you have different ways, many different ways, how you can implement a certain thing, like a work group or a work step or something like that, right? You just need to have it's testable, and the standard tries to specify in as vague yet concrete way as possible, without it's like predicating on a particular implementation the type of tests you need to run. Sometimes it's very specific, and sometimes it is very, very vague. And that has also to do in part with the criticality, and also with existing options that you can plug off the rack, and you just don't want to, you don't want to have to specify you don't want to do the specification of like Kafka again. No need, right? That's what Apache is for, or QP. So enough said.
Hey, Keith, you got more, or is that where you want to stop it? By the way, we ought to carve these out, and I think what Keith said was, how do you get started? This is how you get started. And it ought to be like its own standalone video. We should cut that out and make it.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Most
definitely. Let's do this. Let's have this be the first thing on every baseline show, and I'm going to just watch our hodler viewership go through the floor, and the developer viewership hopefully going through the roof, and that would be right. Given that baselining has very little to do with tokens, you would think that there would be tons and tons of developers on here, and that is the ultimate goal. And then the hodlers will do fine as people make stuff that might have tokens involved.
Well, the hodlers can look at the portion of the standard that talks about, value creation and value exchange.
Yeah, no disrespect to hodlers; they're all good.
No,
It's just-
no,
it's
it's
always
always so good.
always
It's like,
kind
go.
of puzzled me why we had so many really token advocates following the baseline protocol. I'm like, it's a standards body, right? There ain't no token here, man. But anyway, speaking of things that are made that have a lot of financial value, and Keith, are you done? I just want to be sure.
I mean, I could go on, but I think for today's session, yeah, we're done. And next time we can jump back in and get into the more
You need a
complicated stuff.
tagline like, and here endeth the lesson, or something like that.
We need an
gonna make you start.
outro, like the code doesn't lie. Where's that one? Do you guys have that yet?
Code didn't lie.
We'll just keep
All right.
playing Code Don't Lie.
Okay, I'll stop sharing now. Thank you guys for listening now.
Awesome job. Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, that was really good.
Great
You
work.
should be a professor. With that, I think we have two. First of all, we should probably say, when Keith was talking about CCSM, a notable thing, the first production mainnet CCSM launched this week. The base ledger mainnet is live, as I understand it. I think the base ledger team is heads down making sure it's robust and functioning. So I think they're coming on the show next week. But we're hoping. But I think they're right now hard at work making sure everything is solid. Probably watching all the dials and wheels and buzzers. And but congratulations to them. So if you were trying to deploy and you needed a CCSM, a consensus controlled state machine, that's what the standard calls it. And why do we call it that? Because technically it doesn't have to be a blockchain. It doesn't have to be any particular blockchain. It needs to be Andreas, remind me, it needs to be a common consensus controlled state machine that is acceptable to all participants in whatever work group is being put up, right?
That is correct.
Right. So,
and depending on what you're doing with it, it needs to have it needs to fulfill certain requirements, which is the actual part of the standard. There is a whole standard for the CCSM.
Right. And it's probably worth saying that that standard it's pretty obvious that a CCSM, a good candidate for that is a public blockchain or a public L2. Doesn't have to be though.
Yeah. So an L2 is the CCSM is an L1, and if it's it needs to be anchored somewhere. You need to be.
Yeah, it has to be anchored too. Yeah, something.
Right. So it's very clear and very well defined. All the requirements that it needs to fulfill, and that throws out about 90% of all chains, which is good.
Right. Now, interestingly about Base Ledger, I think one of the things that kind of sold me on it, and I'm pretty pro on it. First of all, I like the team, the Unibreak guys and folks. They're pretty practical, and they've been doing this stuff for IT for 20 years. I don't want to make it. I am not an evangelist for any product or service in baselining, so I want to stop short of, some kind of weird endorsement. It's not my job, and it creates problems. But I will say that I am honestly what I didn't like at first, and now I do like, is that it effectively is a permissioned but public chain. Usually, I hate that idea, but when they added the programmatic requirement that all of those Merkle roots are then rooted onto the Ethereum mainnet, I kind of went, oh, okay, that makes sense, and that would be more acceptable to enterprises because it's permissioned, and they can, in a way, it's acting like an L2, even though it's really its own permissioned mainnet. It took me a while to get around that, but I kind of like it now. I don't know. What do you think, Andreas?
Yeah, it's for the basic baseline stuff. It's absolutely usable. It would be great if the proofs could be proven on chain.
Yeah, I almost
Um,
I want Base Ledger and Aztec, sometime this year to have a baby. And yeah, I know that we both want the zero knowledge stuff. I think, but I can't fault them for going for the most basic
Watch
thing.
this
no,
space.
it's
Watch
perfectly
this space.
perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean that's a good starting spot, and that's what their customers are
Perfectly,
asking for.
perfectly fine. There needs to be a lot more evolution in this space, also from the technical side, especially when you're talking about, it's like, again, the basic stuff, right? For what you would need, the basic coordination under zero knowledge does not require anything but an anchor hash that
Right,
can be
which is what they're
resolved
doing.
to, right.
Right.
It's an anchor hash that can be resolved to the Merkle
Yeah,
leaves
and why
and the
you
root
don't
hash.
and
That's it.
what I think what a lot of people missed is, and in fact even some of our friends on in the core dev community, they're like, we have a whole segment, what is Blip 1 is where do you not need to use the baseline approach. And it usually comes down to, well, if you only have two parties and all you're doing is confirming signatures, hashing signatures, then you don't really need it. But I think people forget that part of the baseline protocol is kind of fancy Kafka, right? Or fancy Kafka, fancy key not key value pair Kafka, right? Where you're signaling somebody else that it's time to do something based on dropping a proof and having them pub sub to it, right? And that part, I think, is where having a CCSM, even in a two-party thing, right? Well, I guess even without zero knowledge, you can say, hey, look, we have this, we now have a consistency here. We have the correct event. You can go and do your thing. I think that's where Base Ledger can be useful, even without the zero knowledge stuff yet.
Oh, I think what the reason why I would say even in a two-party system, a zero knowledge proof is extremely useful is for the following very simple reason, right? Is I can stop everything before it goes through the gate. Because if you give me a zero knowledge proof and I generate the public inputs to the proof, and then the proof from my version of the truth, and if then that proof doesn't verify, I know you screwed up, which means I don't even want to talk to you until you're doing something right. I'm like, I don't even want to look at any detail, right? Because the biggest problem that enterprises have is shit goes through the door and it's wrong. And then the whole emailing and phone calling and wait, what is that? Why is that number different? And don't you have that product number? And wait a second, it's like, didn't you have that credit? And then you're immediately at the line level detail, and it costs you hours and hours and hours, and in globally hundreds of billions of dollars in lost productivity. Just because of that. If you can stop it at the door and say, it's like, you know what, I'm not even going to look at it because I know it's wrong. I don't know exactly what it's wrong. I just know it's wrong. So it's like, go figure it out.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about the I think it was Concircle did that, the Excel demo, and their version of the Excel demo provided a version as well. They had a different take on it. What I like attributes of both of them, but what I liked about the Concircle one was, I think it was Concircle, wasn't it? So it was a bunch of people, but who remind me who led
Some
that?
smart people.
Yeah, Unibright and Concircle.
Yeah. What I liked about that one was that it was showing how if there was something wrong, with, it was using it basically for versioning, right? It was saying, hey, look, this name isn't right. I'm going to send it back. And then it was using baselining to do that. And I thought it never really occurred to me to use it to apply the baseline pattern to that particular issue, right? So I mean, you could you put a row in the spreadsheet, and it has Nick Criticos, but I misspelled Nick's name. Then Nick gets Nick's spreadsheet pops and says your baseline event is here, and Nick goes, "Well, that's not my name," and he can actually kind of rebase it effectively. I thought that was interesting. So I think, yeah, it'll be, I think, a lot more powerful with zero knowledge, because as you say, Andreas, then you can enforce rules and say, hey, I'm not even picking this up. Yeah, this isn't validating. But then, you know, the question is, where in the standard do we allow the signal back to the originators to say, there's something wrong with this. I'm not gonna proceed.
Where do we? That's an implementation detail, my friend.
That is an implementation detail. Yep.
Right. It's like it's just needs to. It's just the standard just speaks out what the implementation must follow. How that is signaled back, whether it's a smoke signal or you know a P2P message, just like, what do I know and care, right? The again, I think that the really important thing is to say, it's like, if you don't want to incur stupid work that you currently do, use zero knowledge proofs, because you can stop everything at the door. And before it gets into your kingdom, because once it's in, all hell is going to break loose. So stop everything at the door, and that's what enterprises do not do.
Right on.
And that's where signatures and so forth, that doesn't help, right? It's like you're the argument is, here's the invoice, you need to pay it, you know, but it's wrong. It's like, no, you need to pay it. It's like, no. It's like it is provably wrong. Why should I pay a provably wrong invoice? Go fix it. I don't know how to fix this. Well, that's your problem.
Right on. So anyway, well done, Base Ledger. I mean, you know, Base Ledger is a product in service in the Baseline ecosystem. It is, you know, not Baseline, nor is any other thing. So Samrat and I are, you know, as co-chairs, are always trying to be careful to not, hey, Baseline is a standards body, and stuff that, you know, companies make, you know, around the standard is awesome. We're gonna feature that stuff on the show, but we love it all equally. And we, if anybody catches us playing favorites, please call us out. It's not our job to do so. That said, I think it's entirely right and appropriate, right and proper, for us to say, well done to the first proper CCSM out there. And apologies to anybody that disagrees with that attribution, but I think it's correct. I think, speaking of another thing that is made around the Baseline protocol, Nick Kritikos, do you have anything to say?
I've got a question, actually. You know, the specification is out, right? We're starting to see products like Base Ledger coming out that enable Baseline, but are not Baseline, as you just said. And I apologize if this discussion has come up and it's already been handled. I've been busy, as you know. Has the Baseline protocol community considered some kind of accreditation or certification program for products that are Baseline compliant or Baseline whatever, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Samrat, feel free to tap in here, but and Andreas as well. The standard has to be ratified, and promulgated by the OASIS standards body, and that is a long process. Shout out to folks who, I mean, they give Andreas endless trouble, but they do it in good faith. But folks like Charles Neville and folks like that who really know their standards work have put in real time and effort reviewing it, calling out issues, saying, hey, I don't understand this. This is too hard to understand. This is even down to languaging issues.
Polishing it. Yeah, good.
Yeah, polish. And we really grateful to Charles and everybody else that has done so. And as that goes through the sausage grinder, it'll ultimately come out. I will say that we were sort of hopeful to do it by now, but then it's somewhere along the way we went, there's lots of work being done. The standard being ratified is not the hottest issue. Standards are about longevity, not about intensity.
True, but as you start to get companies bringing multiple products to market and making claims around their baseline this or baseline certified or what have you, right?
They need to.
You know,
be the test
you
suite.
need to have some sort of standard by which, you know, it would be nice if the baseline protocol standard became the baseline for how standards should be drafted. That's
Absolutely. And yeah, so that's as soon as we have that ratification, then we can open up a website or a web page that says, here are the baseline compliant things. You can't be baseline compliant technically yet. You can be ahead of the game and be implementing baselining, but you can't technically be compliant, so we can't say that yet. And as soon as we have the ratification and a test harness that allows you to go through a set of tests, so Nick, your products, I should say, plural, could go through that test harness and say, yep, we are baseline compliant.
I actually, I think there was a very long time back I had brought up this question that would that sort of attestation become an opportunity for third-party auditors to come in and audit and give some logos to or attestation stamps to some products. I think at that time, Chet, he had answered that, maybe companies could pick it up, and if that picks up value, but that's all commercial angle, and we can't be involved in that.
One of the requirements for ratification is proof of utilization. I think 3 companies, I think minimum, if I'm remembering my requirements correctly, have to show that they're using the standard. So things like Base Ledger coming out now in production in mainnet, other products as well. I don't know if Provide's stuff is in production. I think it is, but so that would be another one. But there are, and Nick, N Labs, Tree Trunk is applying. We're applying the baseline approach. Those are all ones that we can do. Nick, before you jump off, I know you got to go. Is there anything you want to say about N Labs yet? I know you guys are rocking and rolling.
Continuing to make progress. We've got, big deals bringing real world assets to DeFi. If you haven't seen the real world asset market on Aave or the gig pool or anything on Tin Lake or Goldfinch or anything like that, it's kind of analogous to what we're doing. And the product team is working on the roadmap. It's not my place here to kind of announce some of the things, but you made some comments earlier. I wish there was a product that did zero knowledge to get things into baseline, for example. Might be something we could talk about in the near future.
All right. I know some people on this call that might be interested in that conversation. Okay. Thanks, Nick. It's good to see you. All right.
And I'm really digging Anant's shirt, by the way.
Anant's shirt, yeah.
I love whiskey.
Yeah, that's the whiskey protocol. That's a whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, the whiskey protocol.
All business processes.
Yeah. I thought whiskey wanted to be bourbon when it grew up, but that's okay.
Oh. Okay, moving on. Sonal, I think you've got some announcements about Amster-based and some other things.
Yeah, so we'll spend some time talking about Amster-based with the remaining time. So we're officially starting our Blip bounty hunt today, and we'll end 3 weeks after the in-person event on April 20th, 3 weeks after being May 11th. And the Blip bounty hunt is just a name for this 6-week urgency of getting some developers together, and forming groups and learning more about baseline, but it follows our standard processes already in place, which involves having a massive drop of blips that will come out today, that were submitted by the community. I think we got about 27 blip suggestions in that form, which is huge, and lots of ideas suggested that some core devs as well as the TSC were assessing for viability and how it applies to the baseline pattern and things like that. So as we've sifted through those, we'll be posting some finalized blips this afternoon. And with those blips, any group of core devs or individual, or if someone wants to start forming groups, please join our community. We have members also looking to get together and meet new developers. But those blips can then have a grant request submitted. So the normal process, a blip in place with an idea. And then when you have your full scope determined and proposed amount, you can submit your grant where the TSC will then approve. So There's a few steps, but it just follows our normal open source community governance. And myself, Yoav, and other members in the community are happy to help anybody interested facilitate that process. And with those blips we'll be releasing, we also are always open to new blips in the repo. Anybody can directly submit an idea. It can even just be like a phrase. There were some suggestions that was just like a baseline to this. And it was like, oh, okay, we'll have to really think about the details of that. But that's how we start pulling together different ideas people are having. And Nick, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. We're rallying some participation in Dev Connect and what do we call it? Amster based or what have you.
I still like base down, but hey, I'm
do they need to register for both, or do Dev Connect folks automatically get access to Amster based?
Yeah, so since all the events are separate for Dev Connect, we have our Amster based event. I will share the link, but any community members there's a price currently in place just so we don't get signups of people who plan on attending, because there is a max on the venue, but any community members can use our code that we'll also share to bypass the price that we have on there. But we would love to see some NLabs and other participants joining in person. So we just started officially circulating the event as we got listed on the Dev Connect site, and we have over 40 signups, 29 for in person, which is super exciting and promising. And day by day, we'll be releasing the speaker lineup. So sponsors have a speaker slot. Mover is officially a sponsor now. So Anton will be joining us in person and speaking, and we have a few others coming in the queue. So that'll be exciting and also increase the interest of participants in person, which will be super exciting. And we have Samrat, Yoav, and Keith on this call, as well as Jack, who's in Amsterdam, who will be going in person and going around all of these events and networking with other developers. So super excited to see what comes out of that.
I can feel the energy already. Limited seating at Amster based, right? You said you're at 29 in person. What do you expect to cap it at? I just want to push on the urgency side to make sure we get the budget and people register early, basically. Don't delay.
So the max for the venue is 120.
Okay.
But we can stay
get on it.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Cool. So with that, we're going to just spend a few minutes. And if we don't get through many of the blips, that's totally fine. I think this is just to start engaging in some questions and conversations based on the blips that were submitted that are not fleshed out enough to be added yet, but we'd like to hear thoughts from the group here. And it also helps the community understand, how do you assess if an example or idea follows the baseline pattern. So one that we'd like to start with that was submitted was related to a baseline poker game. This idea has been mentioned in the past. And I'll hand over to Yoav to give the context on the description, the use case at hand, and then we can have the group further flesh it out. And if it's fully formed, we can add it to the Blip repo as well. I know there's been some interest from devs on doing a poker baseline. So over to you, Yoav.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Sonal. So when you consider a game of poker, right, you've got, we'll say Texas Hold'em, for example, you've got 9 people sitting at a table, and there are several data points at this table that everybody, that is important to everybody, whether or not they can see it or whether or not it's public to them. So things like the chips in front of them, everybody can see the chips, right? But also the cards that they're holding, the bets that they're making, are the chips being put into the middle correctly? Are the cards that they were given fairly dealt? Was anything changed or swapped? Was the dealer acting fairly? Were the chips distributed to the winner correctly? All things that are kind of important to everybody, whether they realize it or not. So the baseline Blip idea here is to kind of take all of that in and coordinate all of that data between all the players, public and private, and kind of ensure that the game is happening fairly and without manipulation. And so I think the thing to kind of discuss is how this exactly gets baseline. What does that process look like? And what is kind of involved in that? I think that's an open floor question to anybody.
You looked at how virtual poker does it?
Virtual poker.
Virtual poker, yeah.
I mean, that's the big, that's the big poker game. I still think that, I think I made a comment on this particular blip, Keith, it seems to me that it does not require baselining necessarily, or maybe, but poker, straight up poker, Andreas, is less of an obvious baseline pattern than a card game wherein two parties who have whole cards have to, those whole cards have to conform to some requirement, some pattern, some claim. And then the third player would, have some options based on that, so that neither in this case, I think neither the first party or the second party, the first player or the second player would have to see each other's cards, although they could.
Like Go Fish or
Bridge.
Bridge.
Bridge. Yeah. I mean, if you're a trump game like Bridge, Trump being an odd thing to say these days, a trump game like Bridge would be interesting, I think, from a baseline. I've always thought that it's just less popular than poker. But does that make sense? And again, that brings in that third party thing. There's very few baseline patterns that I know of that are just two party. And I think that the Battleship game basically embodies that one edge case, right? That pattern of there's two parties and they can't know about each other's setup of some kind, but they need to know one claim, like, E4, yes, it's a hit on my battleship, or no, it's not. That's even that you could argue isn't quite full on baselining, but I'm going to say, I think it's close enough. It's certainly general application of zero knowledge. But baselining is a subset of that general application, right? It's coordination under zero knowledge, as opposed to just zero knowledge.
So I think there's poker is perfectly suited, because it's
how would you describe a pattern in poker that would be baseline, that would be right down the middle of baselining?
Because you're making commitments to sets, right? You're making a commitment. So the dealer shuffles the cards, right?
Right.
The cards are then you're generating a commitment of the cards, which means the order is given.
Okay. So the
and then everybody updates the proof with their
hand,
with their data. Yeah. So it's like with their hand. You're not committing. You don't have to worry about the amounts, the balances, because they're publicly visible. It's only the order of the cards and the cards that you hold and the sets that you hold.
Okay.
And that's your coordination. That's your coordination
fair deck. Yes,
it's a fair deck. It's fair deck. Under
and there's the signaling, right? You have a fair deck, and then you have a deal, and then each player is signaling that they have the deal. Again, I still think it'd be more interesting in a game where the player 1 and player 2 have to do some interaction, and then player 3. But yeah, you
can do gin. It's all about committing to the cards and not being able to cheat, because every time you're committing to a set of cards.
I would agree 100% that that's an application of zero knowledge. That makes sense. The question is it a baseline pattern? And baselining to me always has a signaling component, and it has should usually have a signaling component, and should usually have usually two parties making a claim that a third party needs to believe. Although there are cases where it's just two parties.
Well, you need to if you have the winning hand, right? You need to prove that you have the winning hand without showing the winning hand.
Again, very sensible.
No, but you need to coordinate. Others need to believe it, and you're updating the proofs. The only reason what you have is you need recursive proofs, because then you can validate the entire game with one proof, which is the key thing, that it has been, that everything has been correct, right, from the commitment of the cards all the way through, right?
All right. Anybody watching this show who has skills, you have a direct path to unspeakable wealth. You make a game called Fair Deck. Make sure you can get that name. But I would be going right out right now and making Fair Deck, and basically have, start a poker. Well, I hope I don't get in trouble for advocating a gambling application on national television. But I think I think that would be really powerful.
You don't have to. It doesn't have to be commercial. You can make it. So people are selling card decks all the time.
But I mean, that is for an enterprising set of skilled people, that would be a hell of a, to be able to say, there is nobody. This is a fully non-custodial poker game.
What about
fully
like
non-custodial?
Like a rummy idea where you build off of somebody else's cards, and then that's one commitment, and then you adding in that card, that's another proof that chains onto the previous one, and then that's so on and so forth. And then you got various people doing various kind of combinations, building off of each other's, hands.
Yeah, see, I'm going to stand by my. I think there are other card games that are more powerfully demonstrative of baselining pattern. But I think Andreas is right that you could use the baselining pattern to build Fair Deck, and just that game would have no common server. There would be nobody holding the deck, right?
No, there's one party that there's the dealer. The dealer is always there.
That dealer could be anybody.
The dealer can be anybody. There's one dealer, and the key thing that the dealer does is it randomly shuffles. The only thing is randomly shuffles the deck and then generates a commitment to that deck, which in fact can be straightforwardly a Pedersen commitment.
I'm just watching to see how fast the folks on this call with skills leave this meeting, and to see which one gets done building that application first. There's got to be cha-ching in that idea.
Awesome. Well, that was fun. That was only one, and that's better than speeding through the rest. It gave us a little more direction on how to formulate this Blip idea, and maybe even keep it more general to a card game, and give some of the examples discussed today, and see what creative ideas the community comes up with, as well as people hopefully propose to work on that.
If anybody gets the grant for that, Sonal, they should commit to giving lots of money back to the baseline standards body, because they're going to just be rolling in it.
Yeah, maybe some on-chain tree trunk royalty type scheme. Cool. All right, so we'll just continuously bring some of these other ideas up in future shows. I think the best part is hearing everybody talk through what works and doesn't work. And there's, like I mentioned, a big list of ideas of us trying to figure out if it's a good example or not. Awesome. And with that, I hear the bell, the ding. So that is the end of this week's baseline show. Next week, we'll have our April General Assembly. So please join to get the wide scope of updates from different teams on the community. But thank you all for joining this call on Zoom, as well as those who watched us. So thank you so much. This was fun.
I can see by the clock on the wall, it's time to bid you one and all. Goodbye, goodbye, farewell, farewell.